Tonight, we're peeling back the romanticized layers of knightly chivalry and grand castles to confront a far more pervasive, often overlooked reality of medieval life, the constant grinding burden of pain and discomfort. Forget the fanciful tales of dragons and noble quests for a moment. We're diving into the intimate, physical struggle of simply existing in an era devoid of modern comforts and medical understanding. Imagine a world where every single day was a battle against unseen enemies, not just marauding armies or famine, but the insidious, relentless torment of a throbbing toothache, the burning agony of a festering wound, or the nagging ache of perpetually strained muscles from dawn till dusk. We often look back at the Middle Ages through the lens of broad historical movements, political intrigues, and religious fervor. But what about the personal, visceral experience of living without even the most basic pain relief we take for granted today? The truth is, life in the medieval period was, for most, a continuous, low-grade ordeal of suffering, interwoven into the very fabric of daily existence. It was a world where illness was often seen as divine punishment, where medical understanding was rudimentary at best, and where the human body was relentlessly battered by its environment, ceaseless hard labor, abysmal hygiene, and a complete absence of modern therapeutics. Before we descend into this often uncomfortable truth, tell me, where are you tuning in from tonight? Are you nestled in a cozy modern home, perhaps enduring a long commute, or simply seeking a moment of quiet reflection, hidden from the general chaos of life? Drop a comment below and let me know your location and the time. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Your engagement truly helps us continue to unearth these often forgotten stories. So dim the lights, settle in, and prepare to journey back to an era where silence was often the only companion to profound physical discomfort. This is Pale History, and today we unveil the silent suffering, daily pains and ailments in the Middle Ages. Transition sound, a subtle, low, lingering chime or ambient sound. Visual, a detailed cross-section graphic of a cramped, smoky medieval home, highlighting overcrowding and an open hearth, or a shot depicting raw, untreated human and animal waste in a medieval street. The relentless assault, environmental factors, and the body's battleground. To truly grasp the ubiquity and intensity of pain in the Middle Ages, we must first immerse ourselves in the very fabric of medieval life. It was an existence defined by environmental and societal factors that relentlessly assaulted the human body, turning everyday living into a constant physical challenge. 1. Sanitation and hygiene, the invisible enemies swarming everywhere. For the vast majority of the medieval population, personal hygiene as we understand it simply didn't exist. Daily showers, clean clothes, and antiseptic hand washing were concepts centuries in the future. Baths were infrequent, often communal affairs taken perhaps a few times a year, more for social ritual than cleanliness. Washing clothes was a laborious, time-consuming task, involving lye and harsh scrubbing, making frequent changes impractical for many. This wasn't due to laziness or ignorance of cleanliness, but largely due to sheer practicality. Heating water was an enormous undertaking requiring vast amounts of firewood and labor, and soap, if available, was a luxury item. Lack of hand washing. Perhaps the single most impactful oversight was the complete absence of regular hand washing, especially before eating or after handling waste. The concept of germ theory was almost 600 years away. Hands, perpetually dirty from manual labor, preparing food, and handling human or animal waste, were direct, efficient vectors for disease transmission. Every meal was a roll of the dice with invisible pathogens, pervasive body odor and skin infections, constant sweat, accumulated dirt, and infrequent washing inevitably led to pervasive, often strong body odor. Far more critically, this created a fertile breeding ground for a plethora of skin infections. Fungal growth, such as ringworm or various types of tinea, e.g. what we now call athlete's foot, thrived in the damp, unwashed conditions. Bacterial infections like impetigo or cellulitis could easily take hold in any minor cut or abrasion on unwashed skin. Waste management, or the dire lack thereof. In towns and cities, rudimentary waste disposal was the norm. Streets often served as open sewers, with human and animal waste, offal from butchers, and general domestic refuse routinely thrown directly out of windows or into narrow gutters that ran down the center of thoroughfares. Rivers that flowed through or near settlements often served as both a waste disposal system and, disturbingly, a primary source of drinking water downstream. This gross contamination of food, water, and air was a direct pipeline for chronic digestive illnesses, widespread infections, and a general miasma of disease that settled over medieval settlements. Even in rural areas, animal waste and lack of latrines created similar, if less concentrated, health hazards. 2. Diet and nutrition. The hidden deficiencies that weakened from within. The medieval diet, especially for the overwhelming majority of the population, the peasantry, who comprised 80–90%, was monotonous, often insufficient in calories and nutritionally inadequate. This wasn't a choice. It was a matter of survival, tied directly to the land. Staple foods. The diet was primarily grain-based. Rye, barley, and oats were staples, consumed in the form of coarse, dense bread, thick porridge, sometimes called pottage when mixed with vegetables, or rudimentary stews. For many, bread was the literal staff of life, providing the bulk of their calories. Meat was a rare luxury, consumed perhaps only on feast days or after a successful hunt, if permissible for most commoners. Vegetables were highly seasonal and limited to what could be grown locally, and fruits were often available only for short periods. Widespread nutritional deficiencies. This limited and unbalanced diet led to widespread and debilitating deficiencies. Iron deficiency, anemia, was rampant, causing chronic fatigue, weakness, dizziness, and a general lack of stamina, making arduous labor even more taxing. Vitamin C deficiency, scurvy, was common, particularly during long winters when fresh produce was scarce. Scurvy caused bleeding gums, loose teeth, often leading to early tooth loss, severe joint pain, easy bruising, and extreme fatigue. Lack of vitamin D contributed to rickets in children, causing bone deformities, and weakened bones in adults, increasing susceptibility to fractures. Calcium deficiencies further worsened bone health. Food contamination and spoilage. Food preservation methods were crude and unreliable. Grains, the dietary backbone, were particularly susceptible to fungal contamination, notably ergot. This fungus, growing on rye, produced toxic alkaloids that caused terrifying symptoms, collectively known as St. Anthony's fire, ergotism, which could manifest as gangrene, leading to burning limbs, convulsions, and auto-amputation, or neurological symptoms like hallucinations and psychosis. Uncooked, improperly cured, or poorly preserved meat and fish were frequent culprits in severe food poisoning outbreaks, causing agonizing vomiting, diarrhea, and often death. 3. Living conditions. Cold, damp, cramped, and pest-ridden shelters. Most homes, from the simplest peasant hovels to cramped urban dwellings, offered little true protection from the elements or from biological threats. Cold and damp. Poor construction and inadequate insulation meant homes were perpetually cold and damp, especially during the long, harsh winters. This environmental factor significantly exacerbated conditions like arthritis, rheumatism, and respiratory illnesses. Joints would ache constantly, and muscles would be perpetually stiff. Smoke inhalation. The central feature of most medieval homes was an open hearth for cooking and warmth. Chimneys were rare until later in the period, and often inefficient. This meant that interiors were perpetually filled with thick smoke. Chronic smoke inhalation led to widespread respiratory problems, including bronchitis, chronic coughs, and weakened lungs, making inhabitants far more susceptible to severe lung infections like pneumonia. Overcrowding, particularly in burgeoning towns and cities. Families, and even multiple families, often lived in very close quarters, sometimes sharing single rooms. This overcrowding created ideal conditions for the rapid and unhindered spread of infectious diseases like common colds, influenza, tuberculosis, and more serious contagions that could quickly sweep through a community. Pervasive pests. Vermin were a constant, unavoidable presence in medieval homes. Rats and mice gnawed at food stores and bedding, and their fleas were primary vectors for diseases like the bubonic plague. Lice and fleas infested clothing, hair, and bedding universally. Bedbugs were common. Their bites caused incessant itching, discomfort, and irritation, leading to constant scratching, which in turn broke the skin and created easy entry points for secondary bacterial infections. Imagine the perpetual irritation and sleepless nights caused by these tiny, relentless tormentors. Transition sound. A sharp, sudden intake of breath, or a soft, unpleasant squishing sound. Visual. A close-up of an old, discolored tooth with visible decay, or a graphic showing tooth decay progressing, followed by imagery of medieval dental tools. The daily torments, common pains and ailments that defined existence. Against this harsh backdrop of environmental hazards and nutritional deficits, specific ailments became the fabric of everyday existence, not as episodic events, but as a continuous state of discomfort. Dental agony, the unrelenting toothache and its brutal remedies. This was perhaps one of the most ubiquitous and agonizing pains of the Middle Ages, striking rich and poor alike, though the poor suffered more acutely. Causes: the medieval diet, heavily reliant on coarse, unprocessed grains and sugars, from honey, fruits, and later, more widespread refined sugars, was devastating for dental health. Grit from primitive millstones often got into flour, further abrading tooth enamel. The lack of effective oral hygiene meant rampant plaque and tartar buildup. Consequences: cavities were incredibly common. Once a cavity reached the sensitive pulp and nerve, the pain would have been excruciating, throbbing, and continuous, often radiating into the jaw, ear, and head. Without modern fillings, root canals, or even basic pain relievers like ibuprofen, the only long-term cure was extraction. This was a brutal, agonizing procedure performed by a barber surgeon with crude, unsterilized pliers or even blacksmith tongs. Imagine the sheer terror of facing this. Infection was a constant and severe risk following extraction, leading to painful abscesses, facial swelling, visible often in contemporary art, and potentially fatal systemic infections if the bacteria spread to the bloodstream. Many people would have lived with chronic, unbearable tooth pain for months or years, simply enduring it. 2. Skin deep and itchy, parasites and relentless infections. The perpetual issues with personal and environmental hygiene guaranteed a constant maddening battle against skin invaders and infections. Lice and fleas. These tiny parasites were omnipresent. It's safe to say everyone, regardless of social status, carried them. Their bites caused incessant itching, discomfort, and, more dangerously, could transmit severe diseases. Fleas famously carried the Yersinia pestis bacterium, responsible for the bubonic plague. Lice could transmit typhus, a devastating fever. The constant, desperate scratching would have broken the skin, leading to numerous secondary bacterial infections, making the skin sore and prone to further issues. Caries caused by microscopic mites burrowing just under the skin, leading to intensely itchy rashes, red bumps, and visible sores. It was highly contagious in the crowded, close contact living conditions of the time, often spreading rapidly through families and communities. Fungal infections: ringworm, tinea corporis, athlete's foot, or rather just foot fungus without the athletic context, and other fungal infections thrived in the damp, unwashed, and poorly aired conditions. These caused persistent itching, scaling, and discomfort, sometimes leading to raw, painful skin, boils, carbuncles, and abscesses. Infected hair follicles or blocked skin glands were extremely common due to poor hygiene, constant minor abrasions from rough clothing or tools, and general dirt. These were excruciatingly painful, forming pus-filled lumps that would throb and burn. A single boil could be debilitating, and a carbuncle, a cluster of interconnected boils, could be profoundly painful, leading to fever and general malaise. They were often lanced, cut open, by barber surgeons to drain the pus, a procedure that offered temporary relief but carried high risks of further infection. 3. Musculoskeletal aches, the brutal price of labor. Life in the Middle Ages was overwhelmingly physical, whether tilling fields, building structures, milling grain, or hauling goods. Bodies were subjected to immense, repetitive strain from a young age. Arthritis was widespread and debilitating. Constant heavy manual labor, exposure to cold and damp conditions, and repetitive stress on major joints, knees, hips, spine, hands, led to early onset and severe progression of osteoarthritis. Every movement would have been accompanied by stiffness, grinding pain, and reduced mobility, especially as individuals aged. Imagine trying to farm or spin thread with hands crippled by arthritis. Back pain was endemic. Farming involved endless bending, lifting, and carrying. Crafts like carpentry or smithing involved heavy loads and awkward postures. This led to chronic back problems, including muscle strains, ligament damage, and likely numerous herniated discs, causing radiating pain down the legs. There was no ergonomic design, only brute force and the constant strain of labor. Injuries and imperfect healing. Sprains, strains, dislocated joints and broken bones were frequent occurrences due to accidents in the field, falls on uneven terrain, or mishaps in workshops. Setting a broken bone was rudimentary. A barber surgeon would attempt to align it and splint it with wood. However, healing was often imperfect, leading to long-term pain, reduced function, or permanent deformities. There was no physiotherapy to aid recovery, just time, and the lingering knowledge that a poorly healed limb could cripple your ability to work. 4. Digestive woes. Inside out, and constantly unsettled. The twin scourges of contaminated food and water were a constant threat, ensuring that the digestive system was a perpetual battleground. Parasitic worms, a horrifyingly common issue. Roundworms, tapeworms, pinworms, and other intestinal parasites were rampant due to poor sanitation, open defecation, lack of hand washing, contaminated food, especially raw meat or unwashed vegetables, and infected water sources. Symptoms ranged from chronic abdominal pain, bloating, nausea, and nutrient malabsorption, leading to further weakness, to severe blockages, vomiting, and internal damage in extreme cases. Many medieval skeletons show signs of anemia, likely exacerbated by worm infestations. Dysentery and diarrhea. Bacterial or viral infections from contaminated water sources and food caused severe bouts of dysentery, often with blood and mucus, and ordinary diarrhea. These conditions led to rapid dehydration, agonizing abdominal cramping, and often death, particularly among infants and young children who were more vulnerable to fluid loss. Food poisoning. From improperly stored, poorly cooked, or spoiled food was a frequent and painful occurrence. Vomiting, cramps, diarrhea, and fever were common experiences, sometimes lasting for days and leaving individuals severely weakened. 5. Infections. The miniature plagues that could kill at any time. What we now consider minor cuts, scrapes, or simple fevers, easily treatable with modern medicine, could escalate rapidly into life-threatening conditions in the Middle Ages. Cuts and abrasions. Every cut, scrape, blister, or thorn prick from daily labor was a potential entry point for bacteria. Without antiseptics or even understanding the need for sterile conditions, even a seemingly minor wound could quickly become infected, leading to painful local infections like cellulitis or erysipelas, a distinct skin infection. More dangerously, these could progress to sepsis, blood poisoning, where the infection spread throughout the body, leading to fever, chills, confusion, organ failure, and almost certain death. Fevers and colds. Common respiratory infections often escalated to severe pneumonia due to weakened immune systems from chronic malnutrition and constant exposure to damp, smoky, and overcrowded environments. There were no antibiotics, so the body's own defenses were the only line of protection. Eye infections, pervasive dust, constant smoke from open fires, poor personal hygiene, and lack of clean water for washing led to chronic eye irritation and frequent infections like conjunctivitis, pink eye. If severe and left untreated, some infections could lead to permanent vision impairment or blindness. Childhood diseases. While not always daily, diseases like measles, mumps, chickenpox, and whooping cough were common childhood scourges. While most children survived, the illnesses themselves caused significant discomfort, fever, and pain, and could leave lasting complications. 6. Childbirth. A perilous journey for mother and child. For women, childbirth was not merely painful, but one of the most terrifying and dangerous events of their lives, with staggeringly high mortality rates for both mother and infant. Prolonged labor. Without any form of pain relief or effective medical intervention, labor could be agonizingly long, leading to exhaustion and increased risk of complications. Severe complications. Hemorrhage. Excessive bleeding was a leading cause of maternal death. Infection, puerperal fever, often from unhygienic practices by midwives or birth attendants, was rampant and frequently fatal. Tearing of tissues, obstructed labor, and infant malpresentation were common, with little a midwife could do. Infant mortality. A staggering number of children died before the age of 5, often from preventable infections like dysentery, respiratory infections, or diseases that are now easily treatable. This represented immense emotional pain and recurring grief for families. Transition sound. A deep, resonating bell toll, or a subtle, slightly ethereal hum. Visual. a depiction of the four humours with swirling coloured fluids, or a detailed illustration from a medieval medical manuscript showing a physician examining urine or a crude surgical procedure. Medieval medicine, beliefs, brutal treatments, and the limits of knowledge. When pain became unbearable or a more serious illness struck, what recourse did medieval people have? The answer is a complex mix of deeply held superstition, rudimentary empirical knowledge, a desperate search for remedies, and a pervasive lack of understanding of the human body's true workings. 1. The humoral theory, the dominant, though flawed, principle, the guiding medical theory for centuries, inherited and adapted from ancient Greek physicians like Hippocrates and Galen, was the theory of the four humours. The human body was believed to contain four essential fluids, or humours, each associated with specific qualities and temperaments. Blood, sanguine, hot and wet, associated with courage, optimism and warmth. Phlegmon, phlegmatic, cold and wet, associated with calmness, apathy and sluggishness. Yellow bile, choleric, hot and dry, associated with ambition, irritability and anger. Black bile, melancholic, cold and dry, associated with thoughtfulness, introspection and sadness. Illness was thought to be caused by an imbalance of these humours. For example, a fever might be attributed to an excess of hot blood, while a cold was due to an excess of cold phlegm. Treatments therefore aimed to restore this delicate balance. This theory, while incorrect, provided a consistent, if limited, framework for understanding disease for over a millennium. 2. Common treatments, often brutal, sometimes effective by accident. Bloodletting, phlebotomy. One of the most ubiquitous and enduring treatments, it was believed to reduce excess blood, which was often blamed for fever, inflammation, or a general imbalance. This was performed via venesection, cutting a vein, usually in the arm, or by applying leeches to the skin. While in rare cases, like high blood pressure, unknown at the time, it might have had an accidental beneficial effect, it far more often weakened already sick or anemic patients, leading to further debilitation, fainting, and dangerous blood loss. Infection from unsterile instruments was also a constant threat. Purging, inducing vomiting, using emetics or diarrhea, using laxatives, was another common method to expel bad humours or toxins from the body. Ingredients like hellebore, senna, or even mercury compounds might be used. These could violently purge the patient, leading to severe dehydration and exhaustion, often doing more harm than good. Herbal remedies, herbalism. This was arguably the most effective and rational aspect of medieval medicine. Knowledge of native plants and their properties was extensive, passed down through generations. Willow bark, containing salicylic acid, a natural precursor to aspirin, was widely used for pain relief and fever reduction. Opium poppies were known for their potent pain-relieving and sedative qualities, although understanding of safe dosages and addiction was limited. Many common herbs like chamomile, mint, and valerian were used for their calming or digestive properties. However, the efficacy of herbal remedies was often mixed with superstition, incorrect dosages, or application to ailments they couldn't affect. Amulets, charms, and religious practices. Alongside physical remedies, religious devotion and pervasive superstition played a huge, often primary role in responding to illness. Prayer, pilgrimages to holy sites, touching or venerating holy relics, wearing protective amulets, or performing specific rituals were common responses. This reflected the deep-seated belief that disease was often a divine punishment for sin, a test of faith, or even a demonic affliction requiring spiritual intervention. Surgery, performed by barber surgeons who were distinct from university-trained physicians. They had practical experience learned through apprenticeship, but possessed virtually no anatomical understanding beyond surface observations, and crucially, no concept of hygiene. Procedures included setting broken bones, lancing boils and abscesses, removing bladder stones, amputations, and rudimentary cataract removals. These were agonizingly painful, done entirely without anesthesia. Perhaps a bit of opium or alcohol was given, but its effects were minimal against severe pain, and almost universally led to fatal infections from contaminated instruments or unsterile wounds. The mere sight and sound of a medieval surgery, often performed in public or in a home with unsanitized tools, would have been terrifying. complete lack of anesthesia, and antiseptics. These two greatest advancements that truly revolutionized medicine were entirely absent. Every surgical procedure, every deep wound dressing, every reduction of a dislocation was a conscious, agonizing ordeal. Every open wound was a ticking time bomb of bacterial infection, turning minor injuries into death sentences. The human body's natural healing abilities were often the only true medicine. 3. The practitioners. A diverse and disparate medical landscape. Medical care in the Middle Ages was fragmented and depended heavily on one's social status and location. University-trained physicians. These were highly educated individuals, often trained in prestigious universities like Salerno, Paris, or Montpellier. Their practice was primarily theoretical, focused on diagnosing by examining urine, pulses, and astrological charts, and prescribing complex herbal concoctions or humoral purges. They were expensive and almost exclusively served the wealthy elite, often relying on books rather than hands-on examination. Barber surgeons. As mentioned, these were the practical, hands-on medical practitioners. They performed tasks considered beneath physicians: shaving, haircutting, tooth pulling, bloodletting, and basic surgery. Their knowledge was empirical, learned through apprenticeship, and often brutal. They were the primary recourse for injuries and external ailments for the common folk. Apothecaries. Similar to modern pharmacists, they prepared and sold herbal remedies and other medicinal compounds prescribed by physicians or used in folk medicine. Wise women, folk healers. Often the first and only point of contact for common people, especially in rural areas, they possessed extensive traditional knowledge of herbal remedies, often passed down through generations, combined with folk magic, spiritual prayers, and practical nursing skills. Their empirical knowledge was invaluable for many common ailments, but they often operated outside official medical structures and could face accusations of witchcraft. Monastic medicine. Monasteries often had infirmaries and monks who cultivated medicinal gardens, preserving some medical knowledge from antiquity and providing care for their communities and travelers. Transition sound. A low, mournful sigh, or the creak of old wood. Visual. A lone figure toiling in a muddy field, showing signs of extreme fatigue and bent posture, or an empty, cold medieval street with a chilling mist. The enduring burden, impact on daily life, mortality, and the human spirit. The constant, relentless presence of pain, discomfort, and the limitations of medieval medicine had profound and pervasive impacts on every aspect of society and the individual's experience of life. 1. Diminished quality of life. A constant struggle. Life was relentlessly arduous. For the vast majority, every day demanded immense physical exertion. Chronic pain meant reduced productivity, difficulty working the fields, performing necessary crafts, or even simply moving around. Imagine trying to endure a full day of back-breaking agricultural labor with a perpetual migraine, a rotting abscessed tooth, or joints stiff and aching with arthritis, all with no hope of lasting relief. This continuous physical discomfort would have deeply affected mood, sleep patterns, social interactions, and overall well-being. Leisure, often scarce to begin with, was often impossible to truly enjoy when basic existence was a continuous physical struggle. The concept of comfort, as we know it, simply didn't apply. 2. Grim life expectancy and pervasive mortality. While the often cited average life expectancy of 30 to 40 years for the Middle Ages can be misleading, as it's heavily skewed by incredibly high infant and child mortality, it paints a grim picture. If an individual managed to survive childhood, they had a decent chance of living into their 50s or even 60s, but these later years would have been marked by increasing debility, chronic discomfort, and a heightened vulnerability to fatal illnesses. Childbirth remained a leading cause of death for women throughout their reproductive years, a constant fear hanging over every pregnancy. Escalation of minor ailments, what we now treat with a simple course of antibiotics or a trip to a walk-in clinic. A common cold, tonsillitis, a seemingly innocuous cut, or a bladder infection could easily escalate into a severe, life-threatening condition in a world without modern drugs or sterile environments. Sepsis from a simple wound was a common killer. Malnutrition and famine. While not a daily ailment in itself, the constant threat of poor harvests, crop failures, and subsequent famine meant periods of severe hunger. This directly led to widespread malnutrition, which dramatically weakened immune systems, leaving populations highly susceptible to both chronic illnesses and acute infections. Famine often led to subsequent waves of disease as weakened bodies succumbed. Epidemics. Beyond the daily grind, the constant terrifying threat of large-scale epidemic outbreaks loomed large. Diseases like the Black Death, which killed an estimated 30 to 50% of Europe's population in just a few years. Influenza and smallpox swept through communities with devastating speed and mortality, a stark and terrifying reminder of the extreme fragility of medieval life. People lived with an acute awareness of death's omnipresence. 3. The profound psychological toll. Resignation and despair. Living with constant, inescapable pain, the ever-present fear of sudden, untreatable illness, and the high likelihood of losing children, spouses, or other loved ones to ailments that seem minor by today's standards, must have taken an immense and largely unaddressed psychological toll. There was no concept of mental health support, no therapists, and little understanding of the mind-body connection in a modern sense. Individuals often had to rely on a profound sense of resignation, religious faith, viewing suffering as a test or divine will, or perhaps moments of profound despair in the face of relentless physical and emotional anguish. Chronic pain impacts mental well-being deeply, leading to exhaustion, irritability, and depression, compounding the physical agony. The medieval world was one where resilience was not an option, but a necessity. Outro music. The somber medieval music returns, slowly swelling, perhaps with a subtle echo. Visual. A slow zoom out from a single, worn human skull, or a peaceful but slightly melancholic medieval landscape, eventually fading to the pale History Channel logo. Narrator. So the next time you instinctively pop an aspirin for a headache, receive a quick painless dental filling, or simply wash your hands with soap and hot water, spare a profound thought for the silent sufferers of the Middle Ages. Their lives were an enduring testament to human resilience in the face of relentless physical adversity. They endured toothaches that lasted for months, skin that constantly itched and festered, bodies racked by a lifetime of brutal labor, and the ever-present, terrifying threat of death from the simplest wound. The medical knowledge of the era, while earnest in its intent and often based on centuries of empirical observation, was ultimately powerless against the fundamental challenges of hygiene, nutrition, and the invisible microbial world. The daily pain wasn't just a side effect of existence, it was a defining characteristic, a stark and humbling reminder of the immense progress humanity has made in understanding and alleviating suffering. It makes us truly appreciate the miracles of modern medicine that we often take for granted. This journey into the grittier, unvarnished realities of the past is why we do what we do here at Pale History. If this deep dive into medieval suffering resonated with you, please leave a like, share this video with fellow history enthusiasts, and of course subscribe to Pale History for more explorations into the less told tales of our human past. Tell us in the comments below, what single aspect of medieval daily life, or its inherent pains, surprised or shocked you the most? We're here to unravel the unsettling truth, no matter how uncomfortable it may be.